Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I want to talk about episode 1 of the brand new series Krypton, which is, all told, wrapped up and ground swelling with the lore and the mythology surrounding the Man of Steel himself, Superman's home planet of Krypton, as the title very much suggests. I watched the first episode of this series, and it is now my new sort of genre obsession, all told. And that is because I'm somebody who, has had a lifelong love and fascination with the character of Superman, going back to the 1978 Superman film with Christopher Reeve, which was one of my first exposures to the character, the Super Friends cartoon and things like that, the different cartoons, the Superman, the animated series in my early teens. And as you get on into the 90s, I was watching everything from The Adventures of Superman in reruns on Nick at Night, on school nights, and, staying up late, watching an entire run of a whole bunch of different shows, but that one particularly, and getting into Smallville in the early 2000s. I mean, I have loved Superman my life long. And, even into the modern sort of DC cinematic equivalent, Man of Steel, which had its own, much as the 1978 Superman feature film with Christopher Reeve had, they had their own interpretations of the planet of Krypton. And in each case, it was very, there was a magnetism about it. It drew you in. It was compelling. And it was just absolutely intriguing. And I've wanted for a very long time to see more, to delve into more of the history of Krypton and even Superman's family and everything like that, the precursor to Jor-El. And that's very much what this series embodies. It's something that has been bandied about for a very long time. But now it's finally come to fruition. It's finally become a reality, this series, Krypton. And everything about it is just pitch perfect to me. The casting, the performances, the lore, the mythology, all of the things that they reference in it. I'm not going to recap the entirety of the episode. I suggest you find it and you watch it. But Brainiac being referenced, Black Zero, the houses of El, Vex, Zod, the Fortress of Solitude, Adam Strange showing up in there, Rao, the voice of Rao as it is interpreted in the series, the sort of Kryptonian god figure, if you will, the Genesis Chamber, otherwise known as the Birthing Matrix, and just all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's all represented, all told. And I'm absolutely captivated by the story. We're basically following around a young incarnation of Superman's grandfather, the father of his father, Jor-El. And he's kind of a ne'er-do-well a little bit, but it's mostly resultant from the fact that his grandfather was this very, highly esteemed sort of scientist who he dared to go against the proclamations of Rao and suggest, hey, there's actually life beyond just our one singular planet. This created a conflict. He was seemingly put to death, and the entire House of El was dishonored. Their symbol, the Superman crest, was a dishonorable symbol from that point on. And so they're very much relegated down to the slums on Krypton, the House of El at this point, not even being able to really use their name anymore. And there's so much complexity in the idea of being binded or bindings between people. This is kind of the idea of matrimony on Krypton. Again, referencing the Genesis Chamber, the Birthing Matrix. You have, Superman's grandfather, Seg-El, for all intents and purposes. On the one hand, he has a sort of, relationship going on with a daughter of the House of Zod, but then at the same time, the man who all but, dishonored his grandfather and put his grandfather to death has, taken sort of a shine to him because he ended up staving off this terrorist attack that would have seen to this guy's death, the leader of the House of Vex. And it's funny because he is vexing, as a character. And he actually really reminds me of Terrence Stamp's Zod from the 1978 Superman film. The way the actor looks and everything. But because he's taken a shine to Seg-El for being his savior, his saving grace, he basically tells him, well, you're going to marry my youngest daughter, the daughter of the House of Vex. And it's just, I said I wasn't going to recap it, but I'm just so excited bouncing off the walls by the story, by everything that was going on in it. The cinematography of this series is spectacular. It is cinematic, grandiose in scope, and I mean, it's just the cityscapes and you know, flying through space and all this kind of stuff. It's absolutely insane. It is gorgeous. It is dripping with beauty and intrigue, and you know, just it's so transfixing and compelling. It's crazy. It also makes me laugh. You know, again, with the characterizations and the performances, there is this one moment where you have Adam Strange approaching Seg-El and giving him this sunstone or whatever it is. It's like a crystal with the Superman logo attached to the end of it, kind of like, you know, things we saw in Man of Steel. And you know, there's a point where he like disappears because he can only be there for a certain amount of time, the time travel and all that kind of stuff. And so he brings the sunstone to his parents, and his parents are kind of keeping it on the down low. His father doesn't want to, like, you know, let the secret be let out that you know, Granddad, he actually had a fortress of solitude. He was, you know, conducting experiments behind the scenes against the law and all that kind of stuff about life being out there in the universe, Brainiac being a world consuming entity and all this kind of stuff. And you know, when he's explaining it to his parents where he got the sunstone crystal, he's like, oh, he said he was from the planet Detroit or something like that. I think that's what he called it. And it immediately took me back to Superman 2 with Zod calling Earth the planet Houston. You know, and that is, it's perfect. The writers of this series, they are steeped in the lore with respect and admiration of Superman, the entire comic book lore and everything like that. And I watched a behind the scenes feature actually on YouTube of all places with the lead actor who's playing Seg-El. And he is very articulate and very, you know, sort of familiar to a very, very impressive level with the lore of Superman. I mean, you can tell he is a genuine fan who grew up his life long, you know, in admiration of this character, much as all of us comic book fans are, you know. Like, he is the single greatest superhero ever. And that's something Adam Strange describes him as in this episode. And I could not agree more. And this series, it's rife for the picking of interests because, you know, there are aspects to it in the style and the design that match, you know, things we saw in Man of Steel. There are references that, you know, thoroughly go back to the origins in the comics and things like that. And some things we haven't necessarily heard before, you know, in a live action interpretation of the history of Superman. And then other things that we have heard, you know, Black Zero and things like that, such like that in Smallville. There's going to be, you know, Doomsday references. I don't know if Doomsday himself is actually going to feature in this series, maybe be created, that kind of thing. And then there's also some you know, rumors about Hawkman and Hawkgirl maybe showing up, or at least being referenced, Thanagar being referenced, their home planet, or planet of origin. And it's just, my brain is busted. I freaking love every single aspect of it. Again, the plotting, the performances, the casting, the writing, everything, the cinematography, the set design. It is all spectacular. You know, it gives a new meaning to S, the symbol of hope, spectacular as well for this series. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be watching this one with rapt attention, and I don't think I'm going to be discussing it episode by episode, but I had to put it out there, at least for the pilot, how impressive, how just crazy amazeballs it is. You know, like, I just love to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you've given time to checking out the pilot episode of Krypton, what you thought of it, love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below, but I could not more highly recommend it, with just utmost excitement, bouncing off the walls, you know, excitement about this thing. And I'd be surprised if anyone watched this who is a Superman fan, no matter what the era, you know, whether it is The Adventures of Superman, whether it is the Christopher Reeve Superman film, whether it is, you know, the Superman cartoons of our youth, and Smallville and Man of Steel and all this kind of stuff. I would be highly, highly surprised if anyone who is a Superman fan tuned into this episode, tuned into this series at all, and was disappointed in any stretch of the imagination. But of course, I'm sure it's out there, that exists out there somewhere. So just keep it civil in the comments, no hate and everything like that. Just sort of critical opinions and whatever like that, because of course everything is subjective, and as long as you're respectful, I will listen to you till the sun goes down, So yeah, otherwise that's going to be pretty much it for me on this. I just had to come on, as I say, and talk about how spectacular this first episode was. I really didn't know what to think going into it, and after having watched the behind the scenes, featurette and everything, a lot of love and respect for the character went into the creation of this, and that's both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. And I just say support this to all holy hell, because a lot of series in the sci-fi fantasy genre are short-lived these days, and this is one, owing to being a Superman fan, a DC Comics fan, lifelong and everything, as I say, this is one that deserves to be around for a while and really get along to exploring the mythos and the history, and going into a chapter of Superman's history we've rarely seen touched upon, at least in live action, and even then cursorily in the comic book medium and things like that. So yeah, otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well. Hope you enjoy this series if you check it out, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.